So I really, take the time to look for a unique way to tell stories and unique stories with respect to how buyers are thinking differently about the companies that they're targeting and they're investing into. And really, when I met Robert, I had a little conversation with him. He talked about management buyouts and how that happens to be a core part of their private equity business. So I said, you know what? I think this might be a really good segue for us to talk about, particularly at the M&A forum, because we haven't really discussed that. And really, that's what I want you to walk away with today, is how to start thinking differently about serving the clients that you that you're speaking with, right? Many of us have clients that perhaps are either nearing an exit or at one day exit will become an eventual sort of a certainty. And in that sort of a scenario, they don't necessarily need to just limit themselves to looking for someone that just comes in and as an external buyer. What about the key people that have helped them, help that particular founder get to where they're at today? So we're going to listen to that type of a story today. With that said, let me go ahead and introduce Robert Davis with Bluehenge Capital.
Awesome.
How's it going?
Thanks for having me today.
Absolutely. So as we start off with this, Robert, why don't you tell all of us, just give us an overview about Bluehenge Capital and what it is that you guys do, how you guys are unique in the market.
Yeah, so Robert Davis, I'm with Bluehenge Capital Partners. We're a Baton Rouge, Louisiana-based private investment firm. We're an SBIC, similar to Genesis Park, so small business investment company, and those four words kind of define what we do pretty succinctly. So we're really a lower middle market investor that looks at all types of industries, all types of businesses that comes in and provides kind of creative capital solutions for different types of deal structures. We provide both debt and equity investing. We're not necessarily a bank, and we're not just fitting one box in what we can do from a credit perspective, but we're also not normal buyout guys that just come in and take control, take the reins, and run a business going forward. So we provide kind of this flexible, creative capital that's somewhere in between.
Wonderful. Tell us about, when I think of a management buyout or even a leverage buyout, Dell comes to mind. Right. Michael Dell, took about a $25 billion sort of a buyout, brought his company back into a private, and try to essentially see how they can emerge or reemerge with a new positioning. So having that sort of a frame in mind, what makes this such an attractive option for companies?
Yeah, so I think everybody probably knows the Dell story, right? They started, I guess, in a dorm room at UT back in the 80s. You fast forward to the mid-2000s, largest PC manufacturer in the world. You fast forward a few more years, and Lenovo and HP, I think, had passed them up. And so Dell, with the partnership with Silver Lake, a large-scale investment firm, generated a massive management buyout. And it's one that everybody kind of has come to know just given the size. So it was about a $25 billion transaction. Dell, I think, owned about 15% of the business beforehand, and then coming out the other side as majority owner. He really saw, I guess, the value in the business that others didn't. And so that's one thing that's special about management buyouts is you have an inside player that sees the potential, that sees where the business can get to, and where it is today, and has a different perspective on value creation. And in that instance specifically, Dell had been manufacturing PCs for years, but they had recently entered into the enterprise services space. And so the enterprise services space is more of a recurring revenue stream as opposed to just selling a one-off widget or product. And so the market really hadn't valued that yet, but Dell saw the potential, and with Silver Lake, he was able to kind of capitalize on that. And that's, obviously it worked out for him. He went from being worth a couple billion to he's probably worth over $100 billion today based on that one transaction. But, they don't always go like that, but
Yeah.
that's one where it kind of shows, I guess, what good can come from
What
one of
good
these.
can come from it? Absolutely. Well, so let's again take that, expand it a little bit, and think about lower middle market.
Yeah.
Right. Now you have Bluehenge Capital taking a look at these deals. So what factors would you look for in a company that makes it a great target for a management buyout?
Yeah, so I think when we're evaluating a company and figuring out whether it's a good fit, it's really an established business. So it's hard to take an idea or a startup and do a management buyout with that. And one of the primary reasons is a management buyout heavily relies on leverage capital because generally speaking, managers don't necessarily have massive savings accounts that they can just show up with millions or tens of millions of dollars to do the buyout, and so they need to use someone else's money. And it's hard to get leverage on a business that's very new, doesn't have a long history of cash flows, right? So if you have an established business, an established market, they're a market leader, good wallet share, that has a good history of cash flows, that's something that a lender can underwrite and therefore a good candidate for a management buyout. I'd say another good thing is with the management buyout is you have to have a good management team. And we can dig into that a little bit later. But if you've got some new CEO that showed up 6 months ago, that's probably not going to be the business that's a good fit for a management buyout. And then lastly, it's one, maybe a business where you either have a passive owner or the ownership kind of views value in a different way than the management team. And there's a couple different examples of that. But in the lower middle market, we see it all the time, but you've got a family-owned business that's maybe the second generation of the family now owns it. The kids are more interested in getting mailbox money than actually running the business and figuring out what's next. And so you have a business, we looked at one a couple months ago, making $10 million to EBITDA, and they were making $6-7 million in distributions every year. And so the management team sitting over there wants to grow the business, wants to either make acquisitions or invest in new assets or in people, and the ownership is just more interested in, I guess, what vacation they're going to take that year.
And they're holding it back.
And they're holding the business back.
Yeah.
And so that's a prime example where we think there's kind of untapped value, and quite frankly, it happens all the time in the lower end of the middle market.
So let's take a look at that scenario, and you talked about this sort of a conflict between the management team versus the ownership. And so in that sort of a scenario, it does look like they're primed for a great buyout, but primarily because, again, they're performing really well. They've got great growth potential.
Right.
However, because you've got this sort of a friction that sort of, I wouldn't even call it a friction, but they've essentially got two different stakes in the game.
Yep.
Right? So now, what happens in that sort of a scenario for that management team to be able to say, you know what, we want to now go from being just operators to ownership?
Yep. Well, I think like you said, there's different parties and different stakeholders in every management buyout, right?
Yeah.
You've got the owner, the seller, you've got the management team, the buyer, and then you've got capital providers, right? And so in the instance of Dell, you had Microsoft came in and wrote a loan. You had the big boys, B of A and Merrill, and then there was some equity that came alongside. Yeah. In the lower middle market, more often than not, it's either a bank, a non-bank lender, as well as maybe a minority equity investor. And so you've really got those three subsets to take place. But I think kind of where the value is often for the seller in looking at a management buyout over other buyouts and selling the business is really thinking about the legacy and the culture of a business. And so a lot of owners that could be interested in a management buyout have to look at that and say, if you've had a family business that you've run for years, you don't want to go sell it to the big bad guys in New York that are going to come in and cut head count and get rid of Nancy and AR that's been there for 20 years, right? And so there's that kind of value that the ownership sees, because the flip side of that coin is most management buyouts are either not going to be the highest value, or if they are of decent value, it's not going to be the most amount of cash at close. And we can talk about seller notes and structure later, but those are kind of two facts that present themselves. And so you've got to have this other kind of intangible benefit that the ownership sees in passing it on to the management team.
Yeah.
At that same time, though, the managers, have to kind of know what they're getting themselves into and how the transactions will fare.
Well, in that sort of scenario, when they do have to know what they're getting into, but they haven't necessarily panned out that when one of them disagrees.
Yep.
Again, what things have you seen along the way where something like that arises, and what happens in that sort of a scenario with Bluehenge?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a couple different examples I could draw on. One of which is we did a management buyout. It's kind of a family buyout, coincidentally. So multi-generation business. It's one where the ownership cap table was aunts and uncles and brothers and cousins and sisters. And we came in alongside a bank and provided the leverage for basically one brother who was one of the executives of the business to buy out the remaining family members. He was an existing owner of the business. He was an existing manager of the business. And so that was, those are two things that make it a little bit easier. He already owned some of the business and he was in it day to day. But like I said, all of these transactions, whether you're Dell borrowing, $20 billion or, you're Joe with the family-owned business, I'm just making up names, but he borrowed more money than this business had ever seen. And so with some of these management buyouts, they can kind of go sideways when you've got these lower middle market businesses that have been run essentially debt-free for years. They take on a mountain of debt. All of a sudden, you've got covenants that you have to meet. You're relying heavily on forecasting of the business. And in this instance, we look up 6 months into the deal. They didn't necessarily hit their numbers. They had a seasonal issue. You've got covenant issues. And when we're the non-bank lender in the deal, we've got some of the upside. We're in the equity. We're definitely more understanding, right? Yeah. We're there as a partner. We're going to work our way through the problems. But you've got a bank potentially in the deal, and in this case we did, where they have a different view on things, right? When they're charging 7% for their money, they're expecting it to be effectively riskless.
Exactly.
And when you're 6 months into a deal and you've got a covenant violation, things can get kind of hairy. And so in this case, the CEO ended up having to step in, put additional capital into the deal just 6 months after he had already put more money into the deal. It was, I think, a trying time for him just to go through that and that early on in the transaction.
Yeah. So unpack that a little bit more. I mean, now that having seen that sort of a scenario, when you look at, even when you're looking at additional deals, how do you get them and how do you guide them initially to essentially prevent from something like that from occurring in the future?
Yeah. So I mean, I think inherently the management buyout's a levered transaction, right? The big joke that I was telling someone earlier was that Dell, when I was getting my MBA, the Dell management buyout was actually the case study for leveraged buyouts in general. And it was because that leverage is involved when a manager who owns a little bit or none of a business is trying to own as much as possible, you've got to use other people's money. And so in the lower middle market, though, leverage is not as readily available. And so one of the tools in the toolkit that we try to use and get alignment across the total transaction is like the seller note. And so that's when the existing owner of the business is willing to finance part of the transaction. And that's a way that you can kind of structure around and reduce the overall need for kind of outside capital, and in a way kind of lessen the risk where you're going to have a covenant violation or an issue going forward. And so instead of having a bank and Bluehenge show up with all the money, if a bank and Bluehenge can show up with 60% of the money, and then the owner says, hey, you can give me the other 40%, 5 years from now or 3 years from now, and have a more staggered approach, it allows you to go in with less upfront money and put yourself in a better position for the ups and downs that we all know exist in the normal business cycle.
Yeah. Well, talk about a little bit about the deal structuring from a legal perspective.
Yep.
What's happening in that?
So there's legal on all fronts.
Yeah.
There's the M&A side of things, and that's where the advisors, the accountants,
correct,
and the attorneys come into play and structure everything from a legal perspective. But there's also kind of the go forward legal negotiation piece and understanding that goes around kind of governance. And so that's one thing that we spend a lot of time on at Bluehenge. If we're coming in and we're providing debt capital or equity capital in a management buyout, and 9 times out of 10, if we're calling it a management buyout, the managers are the controlling party after close. We've done some where we're the majority owner, but the management team went from running 0 to 40. But for today's conversation, it's predominantly the management team is the owner going forward. But the flip side of that coin is, it's all other people's money for the most part. And so, we want to see meaningful, what we call skin in the game from the management team. But at the end of the day, they're using other people's money. And in doing so, what you've got to do is set up a structure and a legal structure that makes sense going forward. And what I mean by that is a decision matrix and governance on what type of controls us non-controlling parties have in these discussions. And that's everything from, which really can manifest itself in covenants, but they're typically covenants that may be a little bit more far-reaching than a traditional lender package. And so that could be something that's limitations on CapEx or limitations and approval requirements and consents on hiring and firing of key people. It could be acquisitions and limitations on those. And it really kind of gives us as a non-controlling party or a non-voting party, a seat at the table to kind of work through those scenarios. At the same time, you've got to create a system of governance in place for the management team to take over and run the business successfully on a go-forward basis. And what I mean by that is, the managers have been, quote, running the business the day-to-day for years, hopefully, and that's what made it a good management buyout candidate in the first place. But they weren't owners, and there's a difference in being a manager and there's a difference in an owner. On one side, that can be compensation, right? I mean, as a manager, your goal is to maximize compensation, and you want to get a promotion or a raise every year, the biggest bonus every year. But once you've got an outside party in that's got a massive, leverage facility in, we got to get paid first, right? And so when you're going from a paycheck to a dividend mentality, you've got to think about all the stakeholders that are involved. And so we talk about legal structuring in that sense a lot. The other is just how decisions get made. So a lot of these management buyouts that we do, we call it the three-legged stool. So a lot of times you've got an ops guy, a sales guy, and a finance guy or gal, right? And you could have any mix of those. It could be a CEO, CFO, COO. They may have different titles, but that's an ideal mix that you're kind of covering all of your bases going forward. But when you've got three parties, how do decisions get made? What decisions require consent from all three parties? What decisions can get made by just, 2 people or even one person? And if you've got this business that's had a passive owner for years, these guys have kind of been running the business as they see fit. But now that they're the owners and there's other stakeholders, you've got to figure out how that comes into play. We had looked at a deal a couple years ago. It kind of fell apart towards the end, but we ran background checks. So as any good investor does, we run background checks before we enter the deal. And one of the managers, many years ago, so I think 1999 and 2001, had more than one run-in, with the law. And so there were, a colored history. And, oftentimes your goal with a background check, you get it back, you want it to be 1 page. This one was like 50 pages. And so, you're going through and, thank goodness it was
quite a colorful history.
It was, yeah. And, we all, we're all human. We all go through things, and people can change, and we understand that. And this was 20 years ago, and so we were able to kind of wrap our heads around, this thing that existed when the manager at the time was more college age and living out his dreams.
Looks like you turned it around.
Yeah, well, he turned it around. He was a great guy, great family man. But at the same time, in the back of our heads, we're thinking about, what if something bad like this happened again? How do you mitigate this risk? And so, we wanted to put in place this governance structure whereby if something like that happened again, there was a bad act, there was things that immediately went into place that the other 2 managers would essentially be able to have control and kind of walk this third person out of the business, even though he was basically going to be a 1/3 owner of the business. And so we spent, weeks and weeks and weeks going through these, circular discussions around it. And actually the deal ended up falling apart because we as the outside capital provider could not get comfortable with how the governance structure and the legal structure was going to play out in that transaction.
Wow. So no, definitely a colored pass. Well, let's put that under the lens of financials, right? Due diligence. How have you seen this kind of a deal essentially just go off rails? Primarily because when you took a look at what the financial capability and for what the financial potential of that particular company can be underneath that management, right? Again, they're thinking more like operators, not necessarily owners. And so from the perspective of, look, in order to grow, we might need to grow into a new facility. Right. In order to grow, we might need to buy more equipment. In order to grow, we might need to hire some additional people. Maybe it's sales ops guys.
Yep.
So in that sort of a scenario, again, when you put these guys under the lens of a financial due diligence, what have you seen in a scenario where you start seeing red flags all over the place and said, you know what, we got to back out of this?
Yep.
Or here's how we're actually going to de-risk.
Yep. Well, I mean, I think there's the red light, yellow lights, and green lights, right? And they all vary. So every deal that we're doing, as one would expect, we're doing the Q of E. You're getting an accountant firm to get in there and kind of really get into the weeds of things. And so, I mean, on the red light side of things, you start looking for kind of the egregious add backs, right? And we all expect it, especially being in the South, and a lot of the deals we do are heavy industrial services, manufacturing. So we're all used to seeing the add backs for the college football tickets or the box seats at the baseball games, but it's once you start seeing the T&E that kind of is probably bigger than it should be, and the add backs for the plane rides or the boat rides, we see them all the time, surprisingly, that it makes you start to question kind of the character component. And when we're looking at these businesses, I always tell people this, but in the lower middle market, it's the people business. When we're underwriting a deal with $100 million P&L, you've got a C-suite that all have MBAs, that all went to good schools that we all know. You could lose the CEO tomorrow and the business will keep running, right? When you've got a $10, $20, $30 million P&L, relationships matter. And so it's really figuring out the character of the managers, but then also relationships with the owners. And so that's one red flag that we've come into is in the financial due diligence is figuring out what ownership, who has ownership over what relationships, right? And you find out that your number one customer is, best buds with the owner, who in this case is the seller. And so all of a sudden you've got a big question mark over whether this account can be retained because they went to college, they're fraternity brothers, or went to college together, or they're hunting buddies, or whatever it may be. That's one red flag that you see. And then on the yellow light side of things, it's the managers that have big aspirations, like you said. Maybe they want to enter some new facility, or they want to go make some big acquisition. And it's kind of the illusions of grandeur that they don't realize that they're whale hunting. They think they're just going out for a walk, and so it's kind of trying to figure out whether the management team is coachable and able to work in kind of a collaborative way with us to figure out whether those are good opportunities or not good opportunities. And that's really where I talk about the yellow light. Sometimes we get into discussions. You have a couple in-face meetings, site visits. And you kind of realize that personality-wise, it may not be a good fit, and so that manager thinks that he's going to go acquire the competitor down the road, and he's going to pay whatever it takes to get the deal done, and he's not going to listen to anybody else that tells him he's wrong. Then that's not a deal that is worth getting done.
That's a good point.
But then sometimes we're in a deal right now where management team wants to vertically integrate. They've got one thing that they source, one vendor that they source from that's a huge pain in the neck, and it accounts for about 5% of their total supplies, but probably 95% of their headache. And so they pitched everybody 2 board meetings ago about vertically integrating. And the process of vertically integrating here would be building a facility that cost about $15 million total to create this whole apparatus so that it can be the only person in this part of Texas that can, basically manufacture this material. which sounded great to them, but we had to go tell them that a $15 million investment for a business that's making $7 million a year to cover 5% of your supplies doesn't make sense. And we understand there's always going to be headaches. There's always going to be these problems. And they understood. They were a little upset. I think they liked the idea of a bright, new, shiny $15 million facility. But they understood it, they got it, and we kind of moved on. So.
Yeah, that castles in the skies sort of a scenario is certainly something that again can get missed from someone that's operating a business and not necessarily looking at all of the different pieces that are on the chessboard, right?
Yep.
And in that sort of a regard, you very specifically said that lower middle market tends to be really relationship driven, and it's built around the people, especially the people that are now, essentially prospecting the opportunity to buy that business. However, in that same sort of a situation, when they come in, I'm thinking, how do you incentivize your key people? How do you keep your key people, right? It may very well be that there are key people there that aren't necessarily as interested in being led by this new management.
Yeah.
So what have you seen in those types of situations, and how which deals have worked out, which deals have kind of gone the other way?
Yeah, and I would say we've in our experience at least, that's been one of the easier things to tackle. And partly because you've got a management team, they've all been employees of the business, they're now owners, right? And so they've effectively been in the shoes of the people that are now working for them, right? Because if you're looking at the mid-managers, that second tier, at one point in time, they probably were in that position before they got promoted. And then, they're used to being the employee that's now working for the owner. And so one thing that we're, always promoting is like a management incentive plan. And typically, the managers that are now the owners of the business are open to that concept because they waited so long to get a piece of the ownership to become an owner that they're a little bit more, loose isn't the right word, but generous with, splitting the cap table a little bit and bringing in that next layer of managers.
Exactly.
But, like I said, I think there's a mindset shift of that ownership team and just working now towards what does it mean to be an owner? What does it mean to get the distribution or a dividend and not just a paycheck? And it's really trying to educate and bring in that next level of management to think the same way, to think about creating long-term value and not just dollars this year.
Exactly.
And so that's one thing that we're always partnering and trying to coach the management teams on is, we're a 3 to 5 year investor. That's how our fund model works. That's how our life cycle works. In some cases, managers do management buyouts with the hopes of owning businesses indefinitely. But in many cases, they want to get some type of liquidity event themselves, right? They've been working at the business for decades, years or decades, and they've done well, but they've seen and heard about their friends and guys and competitors selling businesses to private equity or to strategics and having these lifetime liquidity events. And so what we're trying to do is kind of coach them and shift that mindset of being, what does it mean to be an owner and how do you create value? And so as an investor, not all dollars are created equal, right? And so a lot of the businesses that we're in are manufacturing kind of product-based businesses. And so we're always trying to help them, look into, is there a service that can be provided, right? And the Dell example is perfect, right? I mean, it's one thing to sell a product with a great margin and do it once, but the better thing is obviously having a recurring type relationship with your customers. And what type of service can you have come alongside your product set and really create long-term value for the management team.
So that's a great segue, primarily because when you talk about transition into that new ownership, you talked about coaching, right? And I'd be curious to know if that coaching is something along the lines of, let's put them into Vistage, let's put them into our entrepreneurs organization, or something along the lines of where they are actually getting some sort of pure advisory type coaching or someone that's on one-to-one coaching. Then the other piece I'm curious about is just value creation in general, right? as a minority stakeholder in that particular business, to what extent are you actually going in and providing them with some sort of a guidance on, look, this is the vertical that you should be considering, or very similarly that you talked about that other case where they were looking to build a $15 million company, or I'm sorry, $15 million facility with only $7 million in earnings.
Yep.
So in that kind of a scenario, what role does Bluehenge play, and what role do you play?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think in both of those, the coaching as well as kind of long-term value creation, I would say one of our strengths at Bluehenge is, we know what we know and we know what we don't know. And so in the grand scheme of things, I'm a young guy. I work with some of my colleagues who are younger as well. We're all finance people, right? Like, we know our numbers. And so I'm not the one doing the coaching, I'll tell you that. Or if it is, it's tidbits here and there. And so the way we kind of approach that is really through operating partners generally. Sometimes it is executive coaching, and we look at executive coaching more to fix personality issues than, say, long-term strategic insight. Whereas with operating partners, what we'll do is we'll find somebody that's been in industry, that's been in there for decades, has been successful, ideally has transacted and sold a business before, and knows how to grow a business. And in most cases, these operating partners have been in the business and been in that industry longer than our management team. And that the goal is to find somebody that you can bring into the room where the manager instinctively is looking to that person for guidance and as a mentor. And if you can achieve that, then the coaching part is easy. And so we're looking to do that, but we're not the ones trying to coach. And then on the value creation side, we're not operators, and we don't fake it, and we don't try to be. And so with the operating partner component, you're bringing in the people that can do that. But what we can do is we're investors across myriad platform businesses across various industries with various management teams, and so our goal is to take kind of the best practices across one business or one vertical and take that to others. And so sometimes that's introducing management teams from different businesses. Once you hear about a problem, it's, hey, let's connect you to somebody else who's tackled this problem before. Yeah. And whether that's an ERP implementation or implementation on an integration issue on an acquisition, we're investors in enough businesses where someone else has that knowledge that can be shared, and we try to be really just a connector with that knowledge sharing. And then what we also help out with is the governance and the finance side of things. And so those are the things that we can do, right? I mean, everybody on my team knows how to build a 3-statement model and do a DCF and evaluate a payback period on a potential investment, whether that's capital equipment related or an acquisition. We're speaking our language, right? And so that's where we try to step in and add value as an investor. Is the things that we know. And then I think that the best thing we can do, and our managers appreciate it for us, is just try to bring in the right pieces to the puzzle for the things that we don't.
Take a look at that one company, very similar to, again, let's use that Dell example, where they were so product driven initially. Mm-hmm. And now they've added on this sort of a recurring service model. What examples can you show us that again are companies that you guys have worked with?
Yeah, so we're in a deal right now. It's not actually a management buyout. Management team is a piece of the ownership stack, but it's a value-added distributor, and so they take OEM parts, basically handle the nitty-gritty part of putting the components together. They would almost frame themselves as a manufacturer, but they're really more of a value-added distributor. And they've recently found a need really in the servicing of the systems that they've been installing. And so they don't actually do the installation, but they put the pieces of parts together. A contractor does the installation. And so they're handling the assembly component. And come to find out that there's firms out there that are doing the servicing of these components and systems, but they don't really actually know how these components and systems work. Yeah. And so they're spending these service firms. It's in the fire equipment space, and so there's plenty of service firms out there that handle sprinklers and will check alarms and will check fire extinguishers. But when it comes to the more complex pump type systems for a building, they'll cover that within their service contracts, but they don't actually know what they're doing. And so, with the insight from kind of the rest of the stakeholders, investors, they were able and we were able to help, kind of guide the business into creating a new division focused entirely on the service component. And, it's a very, very small piece of the pie today, but over a 5-year time horizon, if you get the right people in the right place, it can become a more meaningful piece of the revenue pie. And when you go to exit, an investor may look at a value-added distributor and say, okay, that's a 6 to 8 times business, but they'll look at a service business that's got recurring contracts and say, hey, this is a 10 to 15 times.
Multiple, yeah.
And so really the goal is, you're not going to get 10 to 15 for the whole business, but the goal is also to get more than 6 to 8.
Absolutely.
And so there's really some value to create there.
Yeah.
But that's also something that, oftentimes management teams, go back to that comment, not all dollars are created equal. Management teams don't always kind of see that, right? They look at earnings the same way, but not through the perspective of maybe an institutional investor.
Great lead-in, because I was actually going to ask you about the long-term vision with all of this, right? And particularly with management teams that aren't necessarily as used to looking at the long term, or that may become a little short-sighted now that they have gone from operators to owners and they've got real skin in the game.
Yep.
And there's a potential exit for everyone that's at the table,
Yep.
right? They want to be able to have a great liquidity event.
Yep.
So how do you help them think ahead and actually think about that great liquidity event in the long run?
Well, that's the beautiful thing about alignment, right? And that's the whole pitch, I guess, about the private equity space in general, is that you've got alignment from your managers all the way to your LPs. And similarly, when we're in a management buyout, 9 times out of 10, if they're looking for a large-scale liquidity event, that's the same large-scale liquidity event that we're looking for. With any transaction, though, when we step in, it's always we begin with the end in mind. And so it's an upfront conversation with the management team. What is your long-term vision? How do you want to be an owner in this business? And are you trying to be an owner for 5 years or forever? And in some cases, it's forever. In the family-owned business I spoke about earlier, he's 4th generation, and he's so excited that he's going to be able to hand this business down to his children. And so, understanding that on the front end is super important for us, because we'll structure our investment such that we can kind of create a liquidity event for ourselves that works with the management team, their timeline, and their expectations. The flip side of that coin, though, is the management team. They've been employees for a couple for years. They've seen all the money that their boss has made, whether it's in the mailbox or showing up, and they want to do the same for themselves. And so that's when we come in, and we're talking about a 3 to 5 year timeline, and they're talking about a 3 to 5 year timeline. And that's where we can think about things differently. We can structure things differently. Because the manager is just as incentivized to exit as we are. And so that's when we have those conversations about creating value and what really investors are looking for. So I think, Bluehenge and a lot of the small business investment companies, SBIC community, we tend to be the first institutional investor in these businesses, right? So it could be a mom or pop, family-owned, or founder-led business. They've had a banking relationship for years, but they've never had an institutional, private equity, private credit firm come in and step into these businesses. And a lot of it's size and scale, but some of it is just where they are in the stage of the business. And so they've never had to work with outside parties, but they also don't know what outside parties or third parties are looking for. Yeah. And so
all the available options.
Right, the available options, and so we'll spend 3 to 5 years really, helping those companies work on kind of exit preparedness, right? And there's a list of criterion that these businesses have to meet for us to invest in them, but there's a much longer list that these businesses have to meet for a mid-market firm to invest in them, right? And so some of that is through the operating partner. piece. Some of that is through bringing outside consultants, and whether that's on the human capital side of things or oftentimes on the accounting side of things. It's bringing in the outside firms that can help with, systems upgrades, whether it's implementing a CRM for the first time or, taking them from QuickBooks, which most of the companies we invest in are on QuickBooks, to something that's a little bit more powerful. It's those things that the manager just looks at QuickBooks and says, hey, that's where I get my financial information out of. Whereas an institutional investor looks at QuickBooks and says, hey, that's what my mom uses for her pet grooming business. So it's about trying to figure out how to bring that business up a level in its level of sophistication to really kind of push the value and the multiple that somebody else would be willing to pay in the future.
Absolutely. Okay, well, so you got 2 factors there. What are 3 others that you can list out in terms of where you take these companies?
2 factors.
2 factors. So you said there's a human capital one, right? And then you take them from QuickBooks to a NetSuite, probably, right? So what 3 additional factors would you say that that are added in as a way to prepare them for a much larger exit to a middle market firm?
Yeah. So I think one of those is whether it's on the customer side or the vendor side, it's understanding concentration risk, right? And you look at all these small businesses, it's super common for them to have one large customer or one large vendor, and that's not something that they necessarily shy away from because they don't know any better, right? And if they've had a 15-year, 20-year relationship with that customer because they've got going back to the hunting buddies comment, they're hunting buddies with the guy, the lead procurement person at that customer, they know that customer relationship's not in risk. And so they've never identified that as something that needs to be fixed. But as everybody in this room knows, any institutional investor will look at a business and any customer that's really over 10% is a red flag. Over 25% is, almost a no-fly zone. And so it's really kind of helping the management team understand that and then trying to grow the business beyond that. One that really comes to mind lately, with everything that's going on with tariffs, is supply chain and where you're sourcing from. And I think it hit everybody. The first wave was really COVID, right? And I think if you were sourcing overseas and dealing with freight, we had businesses where freight went up 4, 5, 6, 7x. And in some cases made certain product lines and markets unprofitable. And so, that's when some parties and businesses started to come to grips with it. But more recently, obviously with tariffs, it's something to take a look at, right? Are you sourcing from China, or is it, India, or is it Thailand, or, how much are you sourcing from China versus Canada versus Mexico? And, having that diversity in the supply chain and redundancy is super important. I joked with somebody the other day, we were talking about a business, and they were trying to raise capital, and we may end up passing, but they were talking about tariffs, and they were like, well, if we underwrite the tariffs, we'll send you the new model. And I was like, well, there could be an executive order sign on, while we're on this phone call that changes the entire dynamic. And things are just happening so quickly right now with that regard that it makes things super tough to kind of underwrite. But that's one area that can really be elevated and fixed.
Absolutely. So is that making its way into the deals that you're seeing now?
It is, and I think when it's really finally hit home is when you see it, like in the investor presentations and the SIMs from the investment banks. Is an area like that they're touting that, hey, we do have a diverse supply chain, or we do have redundancies. I think that's something that's when you now know that people are trying to market on that one fact is something that it's finally hit home that that's what investors care about. Right.
Isn't it interesting how things change in terms of what was attractive about a company 5, 6 years ago or pre-COVID, and now now you're really highlighting the supply chain element or a diversified supply chain. So,
and then the last thing, being the first institutional investors in these deals, we speak about governance a lot today, but oftentimes these businesses don't have boards. There is no structure around that, and so a big piece of that is coaching the management team on what does a board meeting look like What do stakeholders expect to see? What stakeholder, who are the different stakeholders? What information do each of them want to see? Because a bank expects something different than, private credit, private equity fund who expects something different than, your accounting firm. And so I think it's having some level of structure in place where the management is used to reporting to others and outside parties in a presentable fashion the necessary materials. And so if we're the first institutional investor in a company, we're okay with there not being a history of that type of reporting. But if you're trying to go sell your business to somebody else that's going to expect, and you're trying to, get a higher multiple and a higher valuation, that's something that those investors expect to see. And so that's something that we can play a big part in helping people put in place, but an area that we kind of try to focus on.
Understood. Okay, I'm going to open this up for the audience for some Q&As. I think I've got time for Jason Mendes. Go ahead.
So, currently right now, what is the biggest problem and issue that you're actually seeing consistently throughout the last 10 years, maybe 5 years, that the companies that you're acquiring and or even doing the due diligence on, what's showing up for you?
Biggest issue. Probably human capital, I would say, is one of the areas that people gloss over. And I think, we were talking earlier about, in this day and age with AI, and we don't even use it to its full extent or anywhere near to its full extent, but you can systemize and process so many things, right? And so what has to be done today by a person versus 10 years ago, which can now be automated, is game changing. And so what that really does is it brings a renewed focus on what is left, right? So the things that can't be automated, that have to be driven by people, and not to throw my generation or even the younger generation under the bus, but kids these days. So it's I think it's hard to find good people, and especially in the lower middle market. I think it's one thing when all us people want to, all us young guys and gals want to go get their MBA, but everybody wants to go work at Google and Amazon and work at the big company, but nobody wants to go work at the rusty, dusty, blue-collar manufacturing facility, outside Houston. Try finding good, mid-managers in Beaumont. It's a challenge, right? And so, we even joke we have a hard time attracting talent at Bluehenge because we're Baton Rouge based, right? So everybody wants to be in DC or, not DC, New York, DC, and Nashville are cool hip places. So I think that's really been one of the most overlooked challenges that we've seen across kind of all businesses, all industries.
Who else? Fred, or I'm sorry, Clay?
Robert, I'd be interested to know more about the definition of an SBIC compared to other types of investment vehicles like private equity. The limits on the size you can invest in companies and percentage equity versus credit, whatever. What is it that defines an SBIC?
Yeah, no, appreciate it. This is my sales pitch. But no, so we're a small business investment company. We're on our second fund. Our first fund was $190 million. Our second fund's $235. We're in the process of getting ready to raise our third fund. But so at that size, we're investing $10 to $20 million in any one business. What's unique about the SBIC construct is generally the flexibility in the capital that can be provided, right? As you go up market, you've got large direct lenders, you've got large buyout funds, and those funds and vehicles all have very specific tasks, right? But in the lower middle market, we've got a little bit more flexibility. And so what I mean by that is we can invest senior debt all the way to common equity. And so it really is about what we told our LPs we're going to do and kind of sticking to that. And so for Bluehenge, that means about 70 to 80% of what we do is credit and debt investing. The other 20 to 30% is equity investing. And so in any one deal, we could be 100% debt or we could be up to about 50-50 debt to equity. And so on smaller deals, we'll come in and provide what's called unitranche direct, senior stretch lending, and so that's where we're kind of the only debt provider for the balance sheet. On more established, larger businesses, we'll provide what's called junior capital mezzanine finance. And then on the equity side, we're generally minority investors. And so that's what makes kind of our capital solutions so useful for the management buyout is we're not looking to control the business. We're not looking to buy the whole thing and run the day-to-day. But we are looking for some equity-like returns, and we do find a way to kind of get there in these types of transactions. We do have limitations on what we can't do. So there is we don't do real estate. We don't do reserve-based lending. There is some regulations around the public good. So you're never going to see us, financing a casino or a strip club or something unsavory like that. We also wouldn't do it just for own personal moral reasons. But outside of that, it's a pretty wide mandate, and you often have to look at the size. There's certain size standards as well, small business size standards. Those generally, though, do not become a hindrance in what we're looking at. So the majority of the businesses we invest in are call it 20 to 75 million in revenue and kind of 3 to 10 million in EBITDA. And our size standards don't really have an issue with that. So I mean, if you're looking at 100 million of revenue plus 20 million of EBITDA, that is something that's going to start getting too big for us. But at the same time, that's really a market where we don't find ourselves as competitive or really as relevant anyway.
I have one last question with Chris Beasley.
What's your target return for those funds that you organize?
Yeah, so it's kind of a blend of those two return targets. So on the credit side, on the debt side, it's low teens, so kind of double digit to low teens. On the equity side, it's more traditional, kind of 25% plus. And so you take those two things together and mash them together, and we're generally looking for kind of mid to high teens. And so, we'd much rather have a fund that has a much lower kind of standard deviation or kind of upside and downside and kind of generates the mid-teens than something that's shooting for the 20s and could end up in the single digits. And so we like greater certainty in what we're able to generate.
Fantastic.
Following that, what's the profile of your LP fund life?
Yeah, so we're traditional kind of 5-year investment period, 5-year harvest period, so 10-year fund life. You fund up on the way and get distributions on the way down, like most investment vehicles. What's unique about the SBIC community is that because we're an SBIC and regulated by the SBA, it's actually an approved investment criterion for banks. And so it's one of, depending on what regulatory environment you're in, one of the only kind of private equity, private credit vehicles that a bank is actually able to invest in. And we also generate what's called CRA credit for banks, Community Reinvestment Act credit for banks, which is a pool of different assets that, it's a box that banks have to check for compliance and regulatory reasons. And what's within that box is generally not very exciting. So think, HUD and low-income housing tax credits and things of the sort that all generate pretty low returns. And then you've got like the kind of rare unicorn that is SBICs that's also CRA credit, and it's a way that banks can generate mid-teens returns on an asset. It's also a great way for us. A lot of our LPs are banks. The long story short, it's also a great way for us to partner with our LPs, and so we get a lot of deal flow from our LPs because they can't take on the risk piece on a transaction, and so we'll come in, sit behind the bank, we'll take the airball risk, the equity risk. They get to keep the relationship in-house and have obviously a way to work with somebody that they're investing in. So it's a really symbiotic relationship.
Would you consider sticking around? I think there's probably a few more people that have some questions, but I think it's 1 o'clock, so we'll dismiss whoever needs to leave now. Yeah, go ahead, Jason. Yeah.
If I can ask everybody, as you do exit, please turn in your tags up front, please. We greatly appreciate it so we can check them and again.
All right, Robert Davis, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Hope that was good, man.
How'd it go?
I hope so. I mean,